Hello everyone, my name is Bing, aka Eclipse from Crybaby Raiders, and this is part 3 of my raiding guide. This episode we're going to be talking about user interface design, so it's more general than the previous episodes which were mostly focused for DPS. This is going to be useful for tanks and healers as well. I'm not going to design a UI for you. I'm going to talk about what makes a good UI, the kind of add-ons you need, and how to put them together, and it will be more of a guide on how you can put together a good UI that does what you need it to do. First of all, I'm going to talk a bit about the ideas and principles behind UI design, and I'm going to illustrate that by making one on my mage, which happens to have no UI at the moment, and then I'll go through some examples of UIs that some popular ones like ElvUI, and just have a quick talk about how they do what they do. I'll also include some weak auras with this as long promised, but there's going to be more in another episode later. There are some add-ons that I think everyone should already have, but if you haven't, make sure you get them now. Two mandatory ones are, first of all, a boss mods add-on such as DBM or bigwigs, and secondly weak auras. There are some that I highly recommend. First of all, tidy plates, secondly a unit frames add-on, and the main two there are Xpearl and shadowed unit frames, and finally a raid frames add-on, mostly for the healers, and the big two here are Voodoo and Grid. So pause the video, make sure you've got some of these add-ons, and then when you're ready, keep going. So I'm going to use my mage, which has a fairly unset up UI, to demonstrate how I would start setting up a UI just from the default options in add-ons. So the first thing to say is always keep this middle bit clear around your character's feet, because that's how you tell if you're standing in fire, and the area around it you need to know which way is safe to move from the fire. So always keep that clear, and in general the more important the UI is, the closer to the middle you can put it, the less important the further from the middle. I would also try and keep this top area as clear as you can, because that's where the boss is. You don't want too many things blocking the boss, because you want to be able to see if he's buffed or if he's casting a spell, etc. I'm going to start by setting up DBM. Now I have some standard DBM settings I use on all my characters, and I have all the abilities within the next minute just off center, and then the imminent abilities are right in my face where I can't miss them. I can still see my feet. It doesn't really block anything important except for character artwork, which isn't important during a fight, but I can't miss this. This is just right in my face, doesn't matter where I'm looking. And experiment with where you're comfortable with it. But what I would say is, if you find yourself at any point saying, oh, I missed that ability, I didn't know it was going to happen, and you had the DBM enabled, then you probably need your bars to be in a better place. As a raider, you probably don't need to see all of the abilities that are going to happen in the next minute, so you can put these off to one side or something. Let's go to bar setup and click move, and then you can drag them off to one side. But the abilities that are about to go off, I would have them in the middle. The next thing I would set up is probably the unit frames. Now I don't have party frames because I use raid frames for everything, but the two that we're going to focus on, or the three really, the player, the target, and the focus. These are quite important. You need to see what HP you're on, because you need to know if you're about to die and you need to use a big defensive. You need to know for the target, if you're a healer, you need to know what debuffs are on it, or on a friendly target. As a DPS, you need to know what buffs are on the boss, whether any need to be dispelled or spell stolen, or enrages to be removed, etc. As a tank, you probably keep the other tank as your focus, and there you just need to keep track of the debuffs on them. And how you set these up is different for all the different add-ons. I use shadowed unit frames, and there's a very complicated setup where you can go to auras and then give it some instructions for when you should show buffs and which ones you should and shouldn't show. The gist of it is, you know, as a DPS, you want to see the buffs on your target because it's going to be an enemy. As a healer, you want to see debuffs. As a tank, you want to see debuffs. Where you put them isn't that big a deal. People can put them to the side and you know, have player here and target here, or I put them below the character. It doesn't matter too much as long as you can see them quite easily. The last thing to set up in terms of dealing with boss mechanics is probably the raid frames. I'm going to show you using Voodoo. You only really care about this if you're a healer or if you might be raid leading. So if you don't fall into those categories, you can skip over this bit. Again, I'm just going to use a standard profile to demonstrate, which is Bitter Grid. It comes with Voodoo, and it's quite a simple one. It looks a bit like Grid, and most healers put it quite centrally underneath the unit frames. You can use it instead of unit frames, but it means you need to be very careful with what you track with it to make sure you get everything. Some people have it off to one side, left or right. You can do that. The reason I don't like it is because you end up staring at this part of the screen all day, and then it means that it's quite easy to miss something that's going on in this part of the screen. Whereas here, when it's in the middle, you can see the left and right equally well out of the side of your eyes. And I don't really care about the other panels, so I'm just going to get rid of them. And you can use them as tags. I've never really found a need for them myself. And of course, with Voodoo, I'm just going to show you now. There's a nice way that you can test to see how it's going to look before you actually go into a raid. So I'm going to cancel all of that, and I'm actually going to load one of my standard profiles now. Now we're done with the boring stuff of boss mechanics and all that stuff. We'll get on to how your UI helps with your rotation. First thing I do is open Icy Veins and use that to figure out what do I need to track. So anything that says use this on cooldown, I know I need to track that cooldown. Anything that says use this when you get a proc or a buff, I need to track that buff or proc. And in general, anything that says do this when X happens, I know I need to track X. Now I have my list of abilities to track. I use Weak Auras to go about actually tracking them. And usually I start by thinking, what's the single most important thing that I care about? So for Frost Mages, that's Fingers of Frost, I think. And I put that right in the middle so that I can always see it wherever I'm looking. And then I put all my short rotational abilities together. So in this case, that's Ice Nova, which I'm talented for, Freeze / Water Jet, and I've got Brain Freeze procs underneath that. So when I'm doing my rotation, they're all in one place. And then my long cooldowns I put all in one place. So here I've got Frozen Orb, Icy Veins and Mirror Image. And that means I start doing my rotation and all I have to do is glance left every now and then to see are my long cooldowns available. And if so, I use them. But mostly I'm staring at the middle and slightly to the right. And colours are really important because you spend a lot of time looking at your boss timers and at your feet to see if you're in fire. You don't really have time to look and read, oh, what's the text on this timer. Really, all you can count on is looking out of the side of your vision to see, is there a big bar that's flashing to say, I should be using this ability. And you know, here, Brain Freeze is procced. I can't miss it because there's a flashing red bar there, and I know, okay, I need to use that proc. As another example, I'm going to show you my monk UI, which is on the same principles. I've got my rotational abilities and DPS abilities on the right, and my cooldowns and my defensive abilities on the left. So again, I'm using bright colours that I can easily tell without looking to my rotation what's available and roughly how long the cooldowns on everything. It means that when I spend most of the time looking at my defensives, I don't need to be glancing to see, oh, what's next in my rotation. And equally, if I want to focus on DPS, then I can look at the right hand side and all my DPS abilities are there, whereas all my defensive abilities are on the left. I'm going to quickly talk about ElvUI, as that's one of the more popular pre-packaged UIs, and it's decent. Everything's at the bottom of the screen, you're on the left, target's on the right. The reason I don't like this is because it makes you look around too much. Your buffs, you need to keep looking at yourself to see have my buffs fallen off, and then you have to look back to your target to see have my debuffs on the target fallen off, and then you look to the bottom of the screen to see your cooldowns, and your cooldowns could be anywhere along your action bar. It's a bit clumsy in my opinion. I think that debuffs on your debuffs and buffs, maintenance things should all be in one place, and I think cooldowns should all be in one place, not scattered across half your screen at the bottom. So I don't like using action bars to track cooldowns. I think it should be done by a dedicated cooldown tracker, whether that's Weak Auras or Need to Know or something like that. It's not a bad UI to use if you just want something quick and reasonable, but if you're looking to actually make your UI work for you when you're raiding, then I wouldn't recommend it. I'm also going to quickly mention Real UI, which is also reasonably popular, and I think this is fantastic if your goal in life is to pretend that you are a fighter pilot, but as a UI I think it is a catastrophe. You have to look between the middle of the screen and searching along the bottom to go between looking at your debuffs and looking at cooldowns. You still have to look between left and right to go between debuffs and buffs, and because of the colours they use being dependent on how full the bar is, it's impossible to tell easily which debuff you're actually looking at, except that something's going to run out soon, but it could be anything. So I really don't like this. The last thing I'm going to say is keep your UI to a minimum. Everything you put on your UI that you track, think, is this going to change how I play? And if the answer is no, you don't need to track it. Don't put it on your UI. It might be, it might feel great to see when your trinket procs, but if it doesn't change your rotation, then there's no reason to have it on your UI. It's just clutter, and at worst it's going to distract you when it procs. Similarly for things like scrolling combat text, if you like it, that's fine, I have it, but put it somewhere out of the way where it's not going to distract you. Same for recount or SCADA or whatever you use. It's fine to have, but keep it in a corner where it's not going to interfere with actual raiding. So that's it for now. I'm going to include the Weak Auras I've used in this video as templates in the comments. More about Weak Auras next time. If you found this useful, then don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you next time. Good luck building your UIs.